All right, picking up where we left off. Direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Those are our three types of product costs. And we're talking about making donuts. So I typically ask my classes for feedback on what kind of things they would say would be materials, direct materials, in the donut making process. All right, so, you know, it's going to make me happy if I can like draw a line under these things. It's not going to be a pretty line, but it's going to be a line. Direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. All right, now I'll get back to text. Alrighty, direct materials. Think about it. What goes into a donut? Certainly sugar, the best thing, right? How about flour? How about oil? How about, what else do you think goes in a donut? Those are kind of the things I think of. Yeast. How about yeast? Right? I'd imagine there'd be a significant amount of that. Maybe things like chocolate and whatnot, right? So those would be direct materials. The idea being those are core materials and they're quantifiable, right? We would measure them. We would measure how much sugar goes in. We'd measure how much flour goes in and so on, right? We need the oil for the frying part the best, right? So those would be considered direct materials. Direct labor. Direct labor is actually like the baker or the person making the donuts, right? I don't know, is there somebody who does like the kneading? I don't know. Let's just pretend. We'll call him a kneader. I don't know that that's a thing. All right. So the idea is that you have somebody like kneading the donuts. You get somebody baking the donuts. Maybe it's one and the same person. I don't know. Right. But that's direct labor. It's the person with their hands physically like on the product. Now, that doesn't, you know, obviously machines are making some of these things, but it's the person in charge of making the product. All right. Factory overhead. This is probably kind of one of the ones that stymie students at times. The idea is, if it is a cost of making the product, and it is not direct material and direct labor, then it's factory overhead. Okay? So if you need it in order to make the product, if it's a cost that you need, but it's not materials, direct materials, and it's not direct labor, it's going to be factory overhead. All right, so let's think about this. Where are you making these donuts? You probably may make them, you're not making them out in a field somewhere, right? You're making them in a factory, right? So very likely you'd have, you know, property taxes or maybe rent on that factory. All right. You need a place to make them. So that is a requirement. It is a product cost, but it's not direct materials and it's not direct labor. Okay. Other things. How about, you know, how about electricity? Probably need electricity in order to run the business, right? So that is also factory overhead. What else? Machines, right? So we need machines. We'd have depreciation. Ooh, I cannot spell. Depreciation on the factory equipment, right? Any of those machines. How about things like supplies, right? We'd probably need to clean up once in a while. So, you know, Windex and so on. And the other items. All right, so you get the idea. It's the overall things that you need. Maybe you need internet, right? You need Wi-Fi, you need utilities, you need phone, right? All those kinds of things. I know it's a factory, but you probably still need those things. Internet is underlined like it's wrong. Isn't that interesting? All right. The other two things that I want to talk about that maybe not seem so obvious is something called indirect materials. Falls into here too. Indirect materials are those materials that are too small to bother to quantify, okay? Like, it's not worth it. It's an immaterial amount. It's not worth your time to figure out. So something like, for example, we're back to making donuts. Do you think they count every sprinkle? Probably not, right? They don't count every sprinkle that goes on every donut. So if that's the case, and it's not worth it to quantify it, that's going to be an indirect material. But it falls in the factory overhead. It's not a direct material because it's not a core component of the final product. And it's not worth it like expense-wise to track it. The other one is something called indirect labor. Okay, remember direct labor is the people with their hands actually like on the product. They're making it. Indirect labor are people who are still necessary to the process, but they're not actually making the product. So maybe like the maintenance person. I was going to say maintenance worker. Right, the maintenance worker, they're in there shoveling, cleaning, you know, cleaning up your donut mess. They're instrumental to the process overall of making the product, but they're not actually direct labor because they're not hands on the product. Or somebody who's maybe the supervisor, the factory supervisor. Again, hands are not on the product, but he or she is instrumental to the process. So, like I said, you've got supervisors, you've got maintenance, right? people like that. All right, so, oops, all right, moving along. So those are kind of our overall quantity, overall product costs. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say, this is not going to look nice. All right, direct material and direct, hey, oh, I wanted that, okay. Direct materials and direct labor has a term. These two together are what's called prime costs, right? They're the main costs of making the product. And okay. Direct labor and factory overhead together are what are called conversion costs. And that's going to play into something a bit later. But just so you know, these are considered conversion costs. And the reason is because you think about it, you're taking direct materials, right, your raw materials, and you're converting them. You need direct labor and you need factory overhead in order to convert them into your finished product. Okay, so that's where that comes into play. All right. Now, there are other costs in the business that are not product costs. They're actually called period costs. And these are broken usually into two categories: selling expenses and, we'll go over here, administrative expenses. All right, selling expenses are anything to do with selling the product, right? But not making the product, but selling the product. So let's say you've got advertising costs. You've got, anything, maybe you have a store costs, right? So like the depreciation on the store, or the salary, or the salespeople's salaries, right? Things like that are going to be selling expenses. And these are period costs because they are expensed in that current period. Administrative expenses are going to be about the running of the business. So these are things like your management, right? Management salaries, like your overall business management salaries. Things like your CEO, right? CFO, and so on. Oops. It's about shared services like human resources, right? All the costs associated with having a human resources department or a payroll department, right? All of those things, everything to do with the office, if you will, like headquarters is what you're thinking of here. All of those things wind up being in an administrative expense category. So if you have depreciation on the store, it's going to be a period cost. You have depreciation on the factory, it's going to be factory overhead. You have depreciation on the headquarters, it's going to be administrative expense. So it's all about where these costs arise as to how we categorize them. Alrighty. So this is an example that I do in class, and I have students run through these. Let's see if I can make it a little bit smaller so you can see it all on one page. Maybe not. I seem to have lost some of my buttons here. Hang on. I'm going to pause you guys. Alright, I got it all on one page. So what I think you should do is to pause me and go through these and try to decide if they're direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, or maybe they're selling or administrative expense. Okay, and we'll kind of run through these real quick. Okay, so I will pause you, you pause me, you go through these, and then come back to me. All right, let's see how you did. So salary, chief compliance officer, administrative, right? That's about running the business overall. Power used by painting equipment. We're making commercial airplanes here. Factory overhead, that's electricity. Instrument panel, you'd imagine that's pretty significant. Direct material. Annual bonus paid to the chief operating officer, administrative. Turbocharged airplane engine, definitely direct material, right? Interior trim panel, used throughout the entire cabin. I'd say it's probably direct material as well. Cost of normal scrap. Sometimes there's scrap material. It is what it is. Factory overhead. It's just a cost, right? Salary of the marketing department, selling expense. Cost of paving the headquarters, that's the key word there. Administrative, parking lot. If it had been the factory, it would have been factory overhead. Electrical wiring, probably significant. Direct materials. Electronic guidance system, direct materials. Plant managers, the person running the overall operations, factory overhead. Miniature replicas to market the airplane, selling. Administrative expenses, human resources. Metal used for producing the airplane body, direct materials. Annual fee to a celebrity to promote it, selling. Hydraulic pumps, I'd imagine that's a pretty significant material. Factory yearly cost of the maintenance contract, factory overhead, all right. It's part of the overall product cost. Okay. of maintaining the equipment there, right? Your equipment in your factory has to be maintained. Leather seats, direct material. Depreciation on factory equipment, factory overhead. Special advertising campaign, sales expense. Oil to lubricate factory equipment. It's probably not worth quantifying oil, so that's factory overhead. Decals for cockpit door, it tells you the cost is immaterial, so that's factory overhead. Oh, did I miss one? Masks. Yeah, I missed masks. Masks, I mean, I guess it would depend on the masks, right? I guess they're thinking like, you know, nothing major. If it was some significant, like $100 mask, $200 mask, probably a different thing. But in this case, they're going with insignificant, so factory overhead. Well, actually, no, that's not true. It would be, even if it was significant, it would still be factory overhead. It's part of making the product, and it's not direct materials. It's not part of the final product of the plane. It's not direct labor. Insignificant, significant, still be direct material. Still be factory overhead. Salary of the chief finance officer, administrative. Okay, so I'm going to pause us, and we're going to start getting into numbers next. We should probably finish up with the next one.